All right, well, this morning we are continuing in this series called Big Game Hunting. We're hunting things that get in the way of knowing God. Last week we talked about busyness and how we can all get caught up in the busyness beast and how to attack that. And so this week we're continuing on in that concept, that idea, and going to attack something different. And kind of my goal is for us to hunt these things down, figure out how to get some traction with them, and try to actually capture some trophies that we can put on our wall. So thus, there is a deer head on the stage, all right? So would you guys bow with me and let's pray, and then we'll jump into the message this morning. Father, it's good to just worship you. It's good to slow down from our day-to-day activities and the things that happen all week with us, all the pressures that are put on us, all the decisions that we have to make, all the heartache and all the joys, God, and to just for a moment put that stuff aside and let our hearts and minds be focused on you. I pray that this morning as I bring your word, that God, it would be powerful, that it would leave this place and it would go out into each of our hearts and minds and it would work its work inside and not come back void to you. God, we know that there is power in your word, and so this morning we just submit ourselves to you. We want to honor you. God, I want to be your man, and so I just pray that you keep making me more and more like you. Love you, Jesus. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. So I think every parent has probably had to say these words, and maybe your parents said them to you. They go something like this. They go, I don't want you hanging out with that kid because they are a bad influence, right? How many of you had parents say that to you? How many of you had to say that to your kid? Anybody? All right, yeah, all of you. Oh, I did for sure. Yeah, I don't want you hanging out with that kid because they're a bad influence. Now, if your parents never said that to you, guess what? You are the bad influence, all right? So that's just the truth. Sorry about that. That's something that we have to say to our kids. I remember my parents telling me that about two kids named Matt and Chris Quinton. And Matt and Chris Quinton, looking back as a kid, they were fun to hang out with, right? But as an adult, you look back and you're like, we probably shouldn't have been doing that. Like, one day we were having a wheelie contest. You know what a wheelie is? On your BMX bike, you're out there, it's the 1980s, and people have a boombox over their shoulder, and people are breakdancing in the street. And you, as Kent, are riding BMX bikes, and you want to pop a wheelie, all right? You pull your front wheel up off the ground. Well, Matt and Chris Quinton, they're like, let's have this contest. This other kid named Matt Pika goes inside, and this is the kind of kids that Matt and Chris were. They said, let's loosen the nuts on his wheel so that when he pops a wheelie, his front wheel just goes flying off, right? And they did it too. They were just mean kids. They were mean-spirited. Fun to hang out with, but not very good influences, right? We have all seen people who get stuck in a relationship that isn't really good for them, right? You probably have somebody in your sphere of relationships that you look at, and they started dating somebody at some point, or they even got married to them, and all along the way you were going, stop, don't do this. This is a bad choice. This person is wrong for you. They're getting you to do all kinds of wrong things. They're taking you down a bad path. And for some reason, you and everybody else in the world can see the problem, but that person, they don't see it, right? Can I get an amen on that? Have you had that person in your life? They just don't see it at all. They're like, but I love him. Or he's like, she just makes me feel so good. And you're like, just stop doing it, please. And they won't listen. You have felt that. You felt that in other ways. I know I feel this. People will come into my office, and a lot of times it's, their marriage is kind of on the rocks, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and they've asked advice from their friends, and the advice their friends give them is worthless, but they're listening to it. They're like, well, my buddy says that we should just do this, and you're like, that's worthless advice. Your friend's a fool. Leave that person. Get away, right? We can identify foolishness. We can identify bad influences in other people, but we struggle to identify it when it comes to ourselves. Wouldn't you say that's true? Now, I was thinking about this. There was actually some research done about how people influence us, a bunch of studies that people have done. And one of the studies that they did was really interesting. They had students go out on campus, and they were supposed to go and talk to other people and ask them to sign a paper. And what they would say is, hey, I'm supposed to tell you about this class that I'm in and describe it to you and kind of give you a presentation, but I don't really want to do that. Would you just sign the paper saying that I did it for you? And so they're trying to get people to lie for them, and people that they don't know. What they found was that when they asked the student who was supposed to go out and try to get the lies, They said, how many people do you think it will take, you'll have to ask, before you can get 3 signatures on that paper? What they're really wanting to do is not see how many signatures students can get. What they're really trying to research was how good we are at estimating influence that others have over each other, right? So what the student said was, well, on average, it came down to, we think it'll take 8.5 people, that we'll have to talk to 8.5 people to get 3 people who would be willing to lie for us, all right? I don't know if this was done in the 1950s or what, but they thought they'd have to talk to 8.5 people on average to get 3 people who would be willing to lie for them. They actually go out and do the study, and when they come back, they find out that really what it takes is 4.4 people to get 3 people to lie for you, right? There's 1 person out of 4 that are going to hold to their standards and not lie to you. But lots of people just willing to lie for whoever. They actually did a bunch of studies around this, and this is what they said. I thought this was interesting. I'm going to quote it. They said people were actually highly swayed. Not just like moderately swayed, not like people could be persuaded if you talk to them a little bit, but people were highly swayed to do the wrong thing by the advice they got. People were highly swayed to do the wrong thing by the advice they got. As I started thinking about that, I thought, as I talk about this sermon and we go through this, because we're getting ready to talk about the relationships that you have, hopefully you figured that out already, and how they influence you. My guess is that we all think of, our cousin who's in that bad relationship, right? We think of the person who's made the foolish decisions, they've gotten close to somebody they shouldn't have gotten close to, the really bad influencers in life. But I started thinking about, what about the guy who's your buddy and you go hang out with him and he throws back a few beers occasionally and he cusses a little bit and you love to go fishing with him though, you've known him forever, you go out with this guy all the time and he doesn't go to church and because he doesn't go to church, he just says, man, when I'm out on the lake, that's my church. When I'm out on the river, that's my church, right? He doesn't really have a relationship with God. He doesn't know God, doesn't really honestly want to know God. He'll talk about it maybe just because you bring it up. What about that guy? We can all say, well, we shouldn't be with the people who are doing the really bad stuff, the drug dealers or whatever, right? We can ignore those relationships. But what about the person? What do we do with the people who kind of just are what we would call good old boys? Ladies, what about your girlfriend who you've known her since high school, you guys get together, you love to go shopping, you love to just sit and chat and talk, you love the gossip and all the things that you can do with her, and she knows you pretty well and you know her pretty well, and you go out and you do all kinds of stuff with this lady, but she always has an excuse why she can't go to church. When she was younger, it was that her kids were too busy. Now that she's older, she's always traveling on the weekends or what. What do you do with those relationships where the person isn't really interested in God, but you're interested in them? What do we do with that? Some of you are even married to a spouse who has no interest in Jesus, and you are in this relationship, and I'm not advocating that you end it just because, the Scripture doesn't advocate that you end it just because your spouse doesn't know Jesus. What do you do with that? How do we interact in these relationships? What's our responsibility? This morning we're going to kind of cover some of that, and then I'm actually going to post some things on Facebook throughout the week to help encourage you and to maybe cover some of this a little bit more in depth. But what I wanted to tell you real quickly is this, all right? I am talking to you, all right? I am talking to you. I'm not talking to your spouse, your brother, your cousin, your friend, or anyone else, because you and I are the worst judges when it comes to how another person is influencing our behavior. Would you say that's true? This is why your parents could say, don't hang out with Matt and Chris Quinton, and you'd go, but I like them, because you are not a good judge of how people are influencing your behavior. Do you know why I think that is? I think it's because your life comes to you as a stream. There's just this, you have a constant influx of input into the system, and your consciousness is just taking it as it comes to you. It makes sense to you, right? Your life is a stream, but other people see your life in bits and pieces. So they see that one day you used to go to church and you used to be super faithful and all the time you were there, and then all of a sudden you're only going every once in a while and you're occasionally getting involved, and pretty soon they see the next snippet and they see that you're never at church anymore, but you're hanging out with these people who are partying and doing this stuff, and for you it was all just one stream, but for them they saw every single little snippet along the way, and they could see that there's a progression, and they see very clearly the people that are engaged in your life who are driving you further and further from God. And I want to say to you this morning, some of you feel far from God and you can't figure out why. And I'm going to say that the thing that is in your way, the thing that we need to kill this morning, may be figuring out how to deal with some of these relationships. Does that make sense to you? So, that's where I think we need to go. It's where I felt like God is calling us to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the scriptures, because Kent doesn't have great advice, but God sure does. All right? So if you guys want to open up to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, we're going to get there. So you know Corinth is a dirty city. These people were pagans before coming to know Jesus. And so they did all kinds of bad stuff. They're surrounded by people who have no love for God. They are in stark contrast. If you know much about the history of the first church, they're in stark contrast to the church that was started in Jerusalem. This is the Jerusalem that we still know today. The church actually was birthed out there, but when it was birthed into a religious society that was waiting for Jesus to come. And those people, they're goody two-shoes. They come to Jesus and they start having Bible studies and prayer meetings. These people come to Jesus and they start philandering with their dad's new wife, right? They're going out and having affairs with their dad's new wife. That's the difference, all right? The Corinthian church, pagans, didn't know anything about God. They come to God and they're carrying all this baggage with them. And so Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians, giving the Corinthians something to kind of stand on, something that they can use to think about how they're going to relate with other people. 2 Corinthians 6:14, and we're going to go through 18 this morning. He says this, do not, you should underline it, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Do not, whatever you do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Now, last week, if you were here, we talked about what a yoke was. And I ended up, do we have the picture? I ended up finding a picture of a yoke. I tried to think of a funny yoke to tell along with this, but I just couldn't. Thank you, guys. I am a nerd, I know. So this is what a yoke is. It's a piece of wood that goes across the necks of two animals. And these animals, as they walk in unison together. And for the farmer, the guy who's trying to plow a field or pull some kind of implement, this allows him to harness the strength of both animals and to keep them going in the same direction. That totally makes sense to you, right? So when Paul says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers, he is saying, do not put something on your relationship that keeps you so close and tight together that you are always moving in the same direction. That makes sense to you? Here's my problem, and maybe it's yours. How do I actually implement that into my day-to-day life in a world where I don't understand yokes very well and farming and all of that? How do I live this out? What does that mean for my relationships? What does it mean for the good old boy and the good old girl that you guys hang out with and I hang out with? What does it mean about those relationships that we're already engaged in? What does it mean? Where do I draw the line? Because here's the struggle for me. I don't know if you have the same struggle, but Jesus hung out with sinners. Remember Jesus, friend of sinners? Unbelievers? Is Jesus wrong or was Paul wrong? Or am I reading it wrong? What about where Paul says, don't have anything to do with anybody who is sexually immoral, and he says, I'm not talking about people of the world. He specifically says, I'm not saying don't hang out with unbelievers, right? I'm not saying don't spend time with unbelievers. Is Paul just confused? He's crazy. Paul's got two different personalities going on, and we don't know which one's writing. This is the struggle I had. I don't know if you're having a struggle with it or not, if you've ever thought about that or not. How do you as a Christian live this out? I will tell you the old answer, and probably some of you grew up in a Christianity with this answer. It was when you came to Christ, you shed off all of your old friends, and you leave all of your old friends, and you get new friends at church, and you leave your old life completely behind. I struggle with that because I basically say to people that I love and care about, just go to hell, right? That's what I'm saying to them. I struggled with this when I came to Christ because that was it wasn't taught to me, but that was kind of what the language and the way that we talked about Christianity. And so when I came to Christ, I was in high school, and I'd become like Matt and Chris Quentin, just, elevated high school wise, and I'm doing bad stuff and all the time. And I come to Christ, and I have friends who do bad stuff all the time, and I basically left every one of them behind. I went to my 20th year reunion just this weekend, and I saw some of those guys, and I talked to them, and my heart breaks because they're not close to Jesus at all. They don't really know him, and I think, could I have had more of an influence in their life if I hadn't just ditched them? So how do we take this command that Paul is giving to this group of people to not be yoked together with unbelievers? How do we actually deal with that in our day-to-day life? I want to give you something that, at least for me, is helpful. I hope it's helpful for you. This is not from God. This is Kent trying to interpret this passage. You got it? So if you disagree with me or something, that's okay. This is just me trying to interpret this. Here's five levels or 5 types of relational influencers that I see. All right, I would say this might be the kind of thing where you might want to take one of those notepads out in front of you and write these 5 things down. Okay, so the first type of relational influencer is an acquaintance. Everybody knows what an acquaintance is, right? This is the person that you meet at the social for work. It's the person who came as is there with that rep from the company that's trying to sell your business stuff, and you're eating and you're drinking and you're talking, and you just meet them and they're just simply an acquaintance in your life. You would know their name if it came back up, but you're not friends. You've never shared anything personal with them. The next type of relationship is a casual friend. Now this person, and I'll say you can move from an acquaintance to a casual friend fairly quickly. If you have some things in common as you're talking to the person, you'll start to move into a casual friendship. This person you might occasionally get together and do something with. You're starting to share a little bit of your life, but you're still holding most of it kind of close to your chest, right? You all can identify that. You know relationships that you've got that are just casual friends. Got it? These 2 types of relationships are kind of on one side of the dividing line in my mind. And so there is a way that you and I should interact with these people, all right? These people, I would say you are not in a yoked relationship with them. You are not trying to move forward in life with them in a constant direction. Does that make sense to you? So I think it is okay to have a good relationship with them and to be in relationship with these people. But what I would suggest to you is that you intentionally be the influencer. You go into those 2 types of relationships thinking about, as Paul would say it, how can I make the most of this opportunity? How can I make the most of this opportunity? I'm going to be the influencer. This is where, folks, if you've thought about the +1 living, and we talk about it, kind of comes up every once in a while, this is where looking at these people as potential +1s, people that you can pour into and say, the idea of +1 living is just simple. It's this: hey, I'm following Jesus. You want to come along with me? It's not that you say it like that, but it's your actions totally embrace that. You go and you do stuff with them and you spend time with them, but you are intentionally trying to influence them towards Jesus. That's where these 2 relationships lie, and I think this is a good thing. So I would say, in my estimation, yoking does not apply to those 2 types of relationships. The next 3, are where being yoked, I believe, does apply. Third one is a close friend. You all have this person, right? You might have 2 to 5. Maybe if you're really social, you might have a few more than that. But these people, you spend significant amounts of time with. When you get off work, they're the person that you might want to call to go do something if you're looking for something to do, right? These people influence your thinking as much as you influence theirs. Now, you may not be able to identify it because oftentimes you are both coming together and kind of doing the same things and having the same interests, and you're pulling together, but they influence your thinking as much as you influence theirs. And I will tell you, there's just less people in the circle overall. The 4th one is intimate friends. Intimate friends, most of us have maybe one of these if we're lucky in our life. And if you have one that's outside of your marriage, then you're really lucky. So you might have like a guy who's a friend of yours. This is just an extra on there. You should not be intimate friends with anybody who's of the opposite sex unless they're your spouse, because it will lead to sex. All right? So if they're your spouse, that's a good thing, all right? But if they're not, you shouldn't be in these intimate relationships with somebody. Yes, right? Makes sense to you? I know that's a little like, whoa, where'd that come from? But I think it's important to say, intimate friendships are where you share the deepest secrets of your soul with somebody. It's where you let them back behind the curtain. I have a problem with losing my microphone every week lately. It's where you let these people back behind the curtain in your life. You share intimate details. We have very few of these throughout your life. And if you're lucky to have one just actual friend who's not your spouse like that, you are a very, very lucky person. Would you agree? The fifth one is kind of outside of all of these others, but I think it falls still into the category of yoking together, is a business partner. Some of you are business people, and you are people who maybe own a business, and you're setting the direction, and you're casting vision, and you're the one who is deciding what happens and where to go and how the money is spent for the business. And I would say to you, if you are a business partner with somebody, you are yoked together with that person. And if you are yoked together with an unbeliever, you better believe that you are going to come into conflict with that person. This is how our guide for interaction with these people. You need to be intentional about who you allow into your circle. You need to guard the gate. This is why young people, you shouldn't even play around with dating somebody who's not a Christian. You just should not even play around with it, because they are getting in behind the gate, and you're not guarding your heart. For those of us, some of you, I know this is something I'm going to cover more. How do you deal with this in marriage? Because some of you have already let somebody behind the gate, and you're already in a relationship that is unequally yoked, and you don't know how to deal with that. So we're going to talk about that on Facebook a little bit more. This particular sermon is more just geared as an overall sermon, but I didn't want to leave that behind. But I do want to say this: close, intimate, and business relationships require more directional focus. You are yoked together with these people, and so these type of relationships are what Paul is talking about when he says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Now, here's the big one. There is a guy named Simon Sinek. I hope I said his name right. He's not a Christian, but he wrote a book, and he talked about, the book was about the why behind the what. And what he talked about is people won't do the what you ask them to do, unless they understand the why. And Paul was so sharp. Like, Simon Sinek has nothing on the Apostle Paul, because Paul understood this. Paul just gave us the what. What is the what? The what is that we are not to be yoked together with unbelievers if we are Christians, right? If you're a Christian, you shouldn't be yoked together with unbelievers. But maybe you are asking the question why. Maybe you have a relationship that falls within these three types of relationships, and you're going, but I have a relationship that I'm in, a friendship. I love the guy. I love the gal. I don't know what to do. Why in the world would Paul say this? Why in the world would God give that to Paul to say? And this is what Paul leads us to. Listen to this. Back to 2 Corinthians 6. He says, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there with Christ and Belial? Belial is actually a term from the Old Testament that meant the lawless one, or Satan, all right? So he's saying, what kind of harmony is there between Satan and Christ? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I live with them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Therefore come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. That's why. Because you are light, and they are darkness. You are of one country, and they are of another country. I was thinking, how many of you have been watching the Olympics? Do you love the Olympics? How many of you watch anything more than swimming and gymnastics? Anybody? I'm like just swimming and gymnastics, and then everything else, I'm like, we don't really need it. That's for other countries to watch or something. I really particularly love the swimming. We were watching the swimming. You know, Michael Phelps is out there, and I love it because my kids, I can get them to do anything I want. So we're sitting in the living room, and I'm going, USA, and my kids are going, USA, and we're all screaming and cheering, and Michael Phelps wins, and they're jumping up and down, and they're going crazy. I was thinking about the Olympics, and I was thinking about how those guys swim kind of for their own personal glory, but really, at their heart of hearts, they're swimming for you and I, right? They're swimming for the good old USA. They're fighting for our country. They're going out there to give their very best, to show off what Americans have, right? And that's why we all beam with pride. That's why we all pretend like we had something to do with it. Yeah? Right? Like, yeah, Michael Phelps, he's one of us, right? We're like, we're pretty tough. You should see me in a pool. I can float like nobody's business, you know? That's how we as Americans handle it. But imagine this. Michael Phelps he's at the Olympics. And he goes over to the French and the French team, right? And he's just like, hey, in the relay, I was thinking if you guys wanted to, I'd swim for you, right? And they're like, you'd be on our team? Phelps, come on in, you know? Do you think that would, I mean, it's just such a silly, preposterous idea, right? It would never happen. Do you know why? Phelps is focused like a laser on what he could accomplish for his country. Yeah? It would never even cross his mind. It's ludicrous. You might even have thought, Kent, that's just silly. It's just silly to think that you would swim for another country in the Olympics. That you would go and give yourself to them. I heard them interview, I wish I could remember the young lady's name, but she is swimming for us, and she had a chance, I think, to swim for Poland, maybe because her parents, do you know what I'm talking about? Her parents are maybe Polish nationals. And she said, but I wanted to swim for my country, the United States of America. Right? And we all kind of get inspired. You love it. You tingle a little bit when you hear that. That's what we're talking about. And that is the kind of why that Paul puts behind, why would you ever yoke yourself with an unbeliever? Why would you do it? Because you're swimming for your king's country. You are not swimming for the other guy's country. And so when you join their team, you're swimming for the wrong team, and it will drag you away from Jesus. It is a trophy that should be hung on your wall. I yoke myself. I put myself together with believers so I can run the same race with them. So I can swim the same swim with them. I am in relationships with non-believers so that I can influence them and invite them to Jesus. Be a +1 with me. Follow me to Jesus. As I follow him, you follow me. That is to be our interaction with the world. But so many of us are playing with fire in our relationships. We're playing with fire in our relationships. I was thinking about all of this and just this temptation to, because you love people, right? I mean, what I'm talking about could be a very hard thing. I'm advocating that at least in your friendships, if they're deep friendships, that you maybe go from being a close friendship to treating it more like a casual friendship. I'm advocating, if you don't get what I'm advocating that you invest in relationships that are God-honoring relationships. I'm advocating that you check your relationship with those around you because of this. Listen to this. Go ahead and put the next statement up. Who you invest your time with is who you become. Who you invest your time with is who you become. Your relationship with God and the time that you spend doing things are not two separate entities. This is the problem one of the problems when talking about having a devotional time with God is that we set God into this box of like, okay, I'm going to read my Bible, I'm going to spend my God time here, and then I'm going to go out and spend my Kent time, which is like 99.9% of who I am out here. And that is not ever what Jesus called for with you and I. He called for our entire life. He actually called for you to give up your old life and to take up his new life, right? That's what he called for, not for this time frame in your day. I'm not saying having a time frame is bad. What I'm saying is you should have the time frame, and that time frame should influence all the rest of your day. It should be the thing that marks the way you think about your relationships. It should be the thing that marks the way that you think about how the activities that you're going to get involved in. It should be the thing that marks the way you talk, the way that you act, the way that you treat people. It should leave its mark on everything because who you invest your time with is who you'll become. And because your life comes to you as a stream, most of us are not actively thinking about who we are engaging and how we engage them. We're just people. And so we just have friendships and we just have relationships. And I'm advocating that you are intentional about your acquaintances and your casual relationships, that you're bringing those people closer to Jesus, and you guard the gate with your close relationships and your intimate and business relationships. All of this reminded me of when I was in college. I went out to visit my friend Ashton Maxfield in California. Ashton was going to college out there, and you know, when you have a friend who lives in California, and you're in college, you go to California, right? Because you have a free place to stay. So I go to California, and I'm having a blast with Ashton. He's taking me to all these places, and we go to the beach. He asked me if I wanted to bodyboard. Has anybody ever done this before? It's kind of like surfing, all right? Imagine a board like maybe this long. It's like surfing, but you just lay on it the whole time, which I was okay with, because I thought if I tried to surf, I'd be that guy who gets up there and then goes, woo, and the board goes flying up and you see a shark come up and eat him, right? I'd be on YouTube the next day. And so I was okay with the bodyboard of just laying out there and just going, woo, as I fly across the ocean, all right? And so he buys me flippers. Like, I buy the big flipper things, and we get out in the water, and we swim out in the ocean, and you're fighting against the current. It's trying to push you back to shore. You've swam in the ocean. I mean, the ocean, so incredibly powerful. It's pushing you back to shore, and you're swimming against it, and you get out there. And so we get out there, and Ashton says, okay, we want to sit right here. We're waiting for these sets of waves to come in. And after this specific set of waves, there's going to be a big one, and I'll tell you when, and we're just going to swim like crazy and catch the wave and go. It'll push us back into shore. And I was like, all right, whatever you say, Ashton. I'll do whatever you say. So I get out there, and I'm laying there, and I'm a Kansas boy, you know, and I'm in the middle of the ocean. And so I'm like, it's so beautiful. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, look at the ocean. People are swimming and whoosh, crashing, and oh, I just love it. And I look up, and I see all of a sudden that somehow Ashton is like 100 feet up in front of me. And I'm thinking, why is Ashton swimming to shore? You know, like, what's going on? And I say, Ashton! And he looks back at me, and he goes, Kent, swim! I was like, why? And he said, you are being dragged out to sea. And so I was like, ah! And I realized Ashton wasn't moving. I was getting pulled out to sea because the current does crash against the shore, but what happens is it causes a wave underneath the water to come back out into the ocean, and it comes up towards the surface, and it grabs you, and it begins to pull you out to the ocean if you're past a certain point. So I started swimming for my life as hard as I could. I swam, and I swam, and I swam. And I obviously made it. And you were wondering, what happened to him? Is he still out there somewhere? He's in. I was thinking about you and I in our relationships. You know what? You do not stay static in your relationship with God. You are either engaging in things that are pushing you closer to Him, or you're engaging in things that are pulling you further away from Him, out to sea. You are the only one who chooses which things you put into yourself, or that pull you closer to God, or they pull you away. And I will tell you this, God is not the one who moves. You are. If you're not feeling close to God, it's not Him who moved. You've moved. That's why Paul quotes the ancient scriptures and says, come out of them. Come out, come out, come out. Leave. Come back to God. He wants to be your Father. He wants to be your God. John in the book of Revelation will say, He's going to be your God. You will be His people, and He will wipe the tears from your eyes. He longs to have a deep relationship with you, but it is up to you whether you draw near to God or not. The scripture says when we draw near to God, that then He will draw near to us. Where are you at right now? If you're honest with yourself, are you being dragged out to sea? Or are you being pushed closer and closer to the shore? I know where I want to be. I am swimming for my life to stay close to Jesus and get to the place where the current wants to drag me into Him. But you know what that takes? It takes me surrounding myself with other people who are going to walk with me through circumstances. Listen to this. If you want to find a relationship with God, it won't happen separate from those you surround yourself with. This is kind of a myth that we have in America, that we're individualists, that we go out there and you're John Wayne and you just make it all happen on your own. You don't. Nothing that's happened in your life has happened on your own. It's all happened in the context of community. It's how we were created. Remember Adam and Eve? God looked at Adam and said, it's not good for him to be alone. Nothing that happens in your life happens separate from those surround yourself with. It will happen through those you surround yourself with. The place that you get to, the relationship that you have with God, does not happen in isolation. This is why people who say, I can have a relationship with God and not go to church, you may have this hanging on relationship with God that's just kind of dangling, but I can guarantee you, you do not have a full, vibrant life with Jesus apart from the people of God. I'm not saying apart from going to a church service, because that's not the church. This service is not the church. You guys are the church. You cannot have a vibrant relationship apart from a relationship with the people of God. You may have one that's just dried up and hanging on to the vine barely, but it's not strong. It's not vibrant. It's not influencing the world that you're around. At the 20th year reunion, it was funny to me because people knew that I was a pastor, and it was at a bar, so if you see any pictures, I didn't drink. But that's where it took place, so if I was going to go, I had to be at the bar, right? And I was walking around with this cup of water that I was drinking. And later on, this guy named Billy Villanueva, who I love Billy, he is just he's just full of life. That's how Billy lives his life. But Billy came up to me and said, "Kent, were you drinking earlier?" And I said, "I was drinking water." And he was like, "Oh," I mean, Billy's down in beers, right? So it's kind of funny because he was real worried about me. But and I said, "Billy, I don't drink. I don't actually think it's wrong to drink, but I said I just don't personally drink." And he said, "Oh, that's good, because I just thought, I knew you're a big man on faith. You're a big faith man, and I just didn't want you to have something wrong with the man upstairs," right? Billy is somebody I'm praying for now. Billy is somebody that I'm hoping finds Jesus. But do you know what? Billy needs me to have a vibrant, strong relationship with Jesus when I talk to him. You know what I mean? This is not just about you. Stop being so dang selfish in your life. Stop worrying so much about yourself and start worrying about the world around us that's going to hell in a handbasket. What kind of friend am I if I just let Billy go to hell? What kind of person am I if I just let him go to hell? Do you know the only way I'll have any kind of strength, any kind of stamina, any kind of gumption to give anything to Billy? It's if in my close relationships, I'm surrounding myself with other men who love Jesus desperately. That's the only way. It's the only way I'll have anything to offer him, because otherwise I'm going to be just as lost and just as confused, because our relationships do not happen. Our life does not take place in a vacuum. It just does not. This morning, the worship team is going to come up and we're going to sing one last song about second chances. And I want to, you guys can go ahead and come up. I want to offer to you just kind of a second chance. Maybe for you, relationships isn't the thing. My guess is that some of you can look and you can see how you are letting your relationships influence you. I will say this just as a quick side for those of you who are in a marriage where you're unequally yoked, where you're with somebody who's not a Christian. There is a place where you have to decide, I'm not going to be influenced. There is a place where in an unequally yoked relationship, you cannot have the same kind of intimacy that two Christians have. And I'm not saying that, my heart breaks having to say that, but I know it's the truth. Because Jenny and I love Jesus together. And so I know that we walk the same direction, but I know that if you're unequally yoked, you have to guard and protect some parts of your faith. And so I want you to know that my heart goes out to you, my heart breaks for you, but you are not alone. You are not by yourself in that, and you are certainly not alone when you live your life in conjunction with Jesus. He walks through that with you. And you can be a victor. You can be somebody who's an overcomer in that. I believe that the answer is through serving your unbelieving spouse. Not nagging your unbelieving spouse, but serving them. Giving yourself away to them, and stop trying to allow them to provide you any sense of value, because they won't, because they don't know Jesus. And most people who don't know Jesus are focused on themselves, so they're not going to try to do that. But the way that you can influence them is by serving and giving yourself away. And I know just how difficult that is, what I'm asking you to do. I know I can see it, how hard that is. And so what I'm asking you to do is to dig doubly deep into your relationship with Jesus. Dig doubly deep into your relationship with those around you who do love him. Find outlets where there are other people who can pour into you spiritually, who can give themselves away to you. And if you know somebody like that, you better, Christian, you better be giving yourself away to them. This morning, Some of you are being dragged out to sea, and you didn't even know it. We serve the God of second chances. This could be your turnaround Sunday. Will you let it? This morning, will you join us in singing? If you need to turn around, if you need to start swimming towards Jesus, I invite you to come up here with me. You could come pray at the cross. You could come talk to me. We can pray together, whatever you need. But I invite you this morning to turn around, take your second chance, and swim. Will you stand up and sing the song with us?